I can still hear the words like they're carved into my bones. She looked me in the eye, her own eyes cold, lips curled in a way I'd never seen before. And she said, "Mom, you need to find somewhere else to die. This house isn't yours anymore." Imagine hearing that from the very person you carried inside you, the very person you nursed, clothed, fought for, and loved with every ounce of your soul. I was standing there in the same living room where I had once held her tiny hands while she learned to walk, the same space where we celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where her father sat in his favorite chair for 43 years. He had just died. His scent still lingered in the halls, his slippers still tucked beneath the bed, and my daughter, my only child, the one who promised to stand by me after he passed, was telling me to pack my things and get out? Can you imagine that kind of heartbreak? Tell me honestly, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have screamed, collapsed, or just stood there like I did, so stunned that your body feels like it's been drained of blood? I remember my hands shaking as I touched the arm of the sofa, the one her father used to nap on, and she pulled away like my touch disgusted her. "Mom," she snapped, "don't make this harder than it has to be. Dad left everything to me. The will is clear. You can't stay here. It's not yours." Her words were like knives, each syllable cutting deeper. Everything to her? That didn't make sense. My husband and I had spent years talking about how he wanted me to be secure, how he didn't want me to worry in old age. But grief makes your mind foggy, and in that moment, I couldn't process it. I felt like I was standing in a nightmare. My daughter had become a stranger overnight. So, I did what she demanded. I packed. I carried 43 years of my life into a few suitcases. Every photo frame I touched made my eyes sting. I took the sweater he wore on our last anniversary. I took the old clock that never quite kept time but always ticked just enough to fill the silence. I took scraps of a life that no longer felt like mine. And as I left that house, her house now, she didn't even look back. She didn't hug me, didn't comfort me, didn't shed a tear. She closed the door behind me as though she were shutting out a beggar. Tell me, does that sound like a daughter to you? Or does it sound like a vulture circling the weakest in the flock? The first nights were the worst. I stayed with an old friend, embarrassed and hollow, too proud to admit the truth out loud. I told her I just needed space, but she knew. The pity in her eyes made me feel smaller than I already did. I cried myself to sleep, clutching his sweater, whispering his name as if he could still hear me. I kept asking him in my prayers, why? Why would she do this? Did we raise her wrong? Did I love her too much or not enough? Grief and betrayal are a cruel cocktail. They leave you drunk on pain, unable to find your footing. Weeks passed, and I tried to rebuild a little routine. I found a tiny rental, nothing like the home I'd lost, but at least it had 4 walls and a roof. I sold some jewelry to pay the deposit. Each day, I would sit by the window, staring out at the street, wondering if she'd call, if she would regret what she'd done. Instead, I got silence. Silence so thick, it screamed louder than words ever could. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. Her number. My heart leapt with hope. Maybe she realized her cruelty. Maybe she was ready to make amends. But no. She said in that flat voice, "Mom, don't try to fight this. Dad left everything to me. It's mine. If you try to contest it, you'll just embarrass yourself." I felt the world tilt. Contest it? Why would I need to contest it if it were true? That's when the seed of doubt cracked open in my chest. I went to the family lawyer, a man who had worked with us for decades, someone who knew my husband's handwriting, his voice, his values. Sitting in his office, my hands trembling, I pushed the will across his desk. "She says this is final, that I have no claim," I whispered. He adjusted his glasses, studied the document, and then looked at me with a softness that told me everything before he even opened his mouth. "This doesn't look right," he said quietly. He pointed out the signature, the wording, the strange clauses that had never come up in any of our prior discussions. My husband had never been a man of complicated language. This will was stuffed with jargon, loopholes, and contradictions. My heart pounded. He leaned closer and said, "I don't think your husband wrote this. I think someone forged it." My stomach dropped. Forged. The word rang in my head like a gunshot. My daughter had stolen not just my home, but my life, my security, my dignity, and she thought she'd get away with it? I wish I could say I was surprised, but in some corner of my soul, I already knew. The way she smiled that day, the way she rushed me out of the house, it was all too calculated. She hadn't just betrayed me in a moment of grief, she had planned it. Do you know how sickening that realization is? To know your child didn't just hurt you, but plotted against you while you were mourning the man you loved? My hands clenched into fists on that lawyer's desk. For the first time since her cruel ultimatum, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger. White-hot, blistering anger. The lawyer helped me contact the authorities. Police, banks, investigators. They began freezing accounts, questioning documents, unraveling the web she and her husband, yes, her husband was in on it too, had spun around me. Every new detail was another slap in the face. They had moved money, shifted titles, played games with assets that rightfully belonged to me. It wasn't just greed. It was elder abuse, plain and simple. The system moves slow, though, and while they were digging, I had to face her. Because she started calling. First with excuses, then with anger, then with tears. "Mom, how could you do this to me?" she whined, as if I were the one who betrayed her. I remember gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "Do this to you?" I hissed. "You stole from me, you forged your father's name, and you told me to die on the street. Don't you dare cry to me." She went silent then, but I could hear her breathing. Shallow and rapid. She wasn't sorry. She was afraid. Good, I thought. Let her be afraid. That night, lying in bed in that cramped little rental, I thought about everything she had taken. My home, my peace, my trust. And I thought about what I still had. Knowledge, truth, and a fire inside me that she couldn't begin to understand. That's when the idea of revenge stopped being a whisper and started being a promise. I would see justice done. I would reclaim what was mine, and I would make her regret the day she ever thought her own mother was weak enough to destroy. Be honest, if it were you, if your own child had done this, would you let it slide? Or would you fight back with everything you had left? I kept going. I kept digging into the memory of him, the cadence of his laugh, the tiny way he tapped the table when he was thinking, because in those little pieces of him, I could find the reason I had to keep going. The lawyer sat with me until late, tracing the ink on that will with a magnifying glass as if it might suddenly confess its lies. He showed me the differences in the loops and the pressure of the pen, where a genuine signature would have the weight of a lifetime behind it. He said, "This was done by someone who knew how to make it look convincing, but not by your husband." The room smelled like old books and dust and a kind of slow clinical betrayal. I wanted to vomit. We began to map it out like detectives. Dates, bank transfers, signatures, strange notarizations, the hurried way the deed had been changed a week after he died. The more we pulled on that thread, the more it unraveled. There were emails between my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, talking about transfers, about taking care of things. There were phone records showing calls that coincided with the times my husband met with the lawyer. There were witnesses who remember seeing my daughter at the house more often than she admitted in those last months. Every bit of evidence built the outline of a plan that had been executed with cruel precision. I felt sick reading it. The way each paper made me smaller and angrier at once. They knew exactly what they were doing, the lawyer said. They planned this. And yet, even with evidence, the system is slow and clumsy. Institutions move at their own sluggish pace, while people like my daughter move fast, thinking money is a kind of invincibility. The bank flagged several transfers and froze a few accounts, but assets had already been shifted to offshore entities, to shell corporations, to places that make it hard for an ordinary person to get them back. She had covered her tracks, she had tried to make it look clean, but no crime is perfect. People leave fingerprints on paper and in conversations and in the way they act when you cut them open. That's how I started finding the edges of her plan. She called often, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes with a mocking laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "You're making this worse," she said once, venom in her voice. "Stop dragging his name through the mud." How dare she call his name mud? How dare she tell me to be quiet after she had stolen his legacy? But I didn't scream. I listened. I let her talk herself into more and more details. People make mistakes when they think they still have power over you. They get sloppy. She told me once, just offhandedly, as if the admission meant nothing, that they had the papers reviewed by a man in a downtown office, someone with a reputation for smoothing tricky things out. That name, tossed like an afterthought, became the rope I would use to pull the whole thing into the light. Do you know what it's like to retrace the life you thought you lived and find so many holes? To comb through years and discover manipulations you hadn't noticed? I sifted through photographs and receipts, emails and notes tucked into drawers, the little things that become the anchors of a life. I found a receipt for a cashier's check she'd made out to someone with the last name of a notary I'd never heard of. I found a florist receipt for a bouquet delivered to that notary's office on a day when my husband was supposed to be at home resting. The world kept revealing its ugly choreography. Every discovery filled me with equal parts vindication and grief. Vindication because the truth was there, tangible and raw. Grief because my own child had been the conductor of this cruelty. Once the lawyer and I felt certain enough, we went to the police. I'll never forget the detective who first took my statement. He was younger than me, earnest, the kind of person you want on your side in a small-town drama. He asked questions I didn't expect, about relationships, about resentments, about access. "Was there anyone who stood to gain if your husband's estate went the way it did?" he asked. My breath caught. "Yes," I said. "My daughter." Saying it out loud made it real in a way I was not prepared for. "And her husband," I added. He took notes, his pen scratching like a metronome counting down the end of something. The police moved slowly, at first, polite but cautious. They needed evidence. They needed more than my grief. So I kept looking. I talked to neighbors who had seen them both coming and going at strange hours. I tracked down a former accountant who had been dismissed and who, at the mention of my husband's name, started talking faster than I could keep up with. He told me that my husband had never intended the will to be complicated, that he had been worried about being used, that he had joked years ago about making a will that would give everything to both of us so neither of us would be alone. That wasn't a joke. That was his sense of fairness. The idea that someone could twist that into an instrument of dispossession made bile rise in my throat. I started noticing things differently. I watched their social media, the photos of vacations and new cars and champagne toasts, photos taken in the same month they were quietly redirecting assets. I listened to voicemails I had saved for years, searching for the tone in his voice before he got sick, and mourning that absent sound. The betrayal wasn't a single moment anymore. It was 1,000 little calculated moves stitched together into a tapestry meant to erase me. I pictured them sitting late at night, plotting over wine, talking about their future, about how easy it would be when the house and the accounts were theirs. I imagined them laughing at my smallness. The image set my teeth on edge. And yet, in those dark nights, something else grew. Resolve. I stopped being a ghost in my own life. I started taking notes, making lists, setting small objectives. Where I had once been passive, I became meticulous. I learned how to follow a paper trail. I learned the names of bank officers and the language of trusts. I learned to call things by their proper name: theft, elder abuse, conspiracy. Knowledge became my armor. It gave me something practical to do with all that pain that felt so useless otherwise. If I was going to be carved out of my life, I would carve myself back in. She called me one afternoon in a voice coated with something like desperation. "Mom," she said, "please come. I need you to sign some papers. There's been some mix-up." A trep, I thought. Or at least a test. Would I walk back into the den that just kicked me out? Would I trust her again? My first instinct was to tell her to go to hell. My second was to say nothing at all. But I also knew that if I refused every approach, she'd get the impression that I was broken, that I had conceded. So I agreed, on my terms. I would meet her at the lawyer's office, public, safe, and with witnesses. I called the lawyer and told him everything. He insisted on being present. When I walked in, she tried to smile in that practiced way. Her husband sat beside her, too calm, his mouth a line. They handed me documents that looked plain enough, forms about transferring minor items, a new list of household accounts. Just small things, my daughter said, as if the word small could varnish their actions. The lawyer watched closely. The meeting was a sting operation of civility. She tried her tactics, guilt, flattery, even a false show of contrition, but the lawyer held firm, asking pointed questions, refusing to sign or acknowledge anything until everything was cleared. You should have seen the way her composure slipped when the lawyer mentioned the forgery and the bank investigations. It was a small crack at first, a twitch near the eye. Then it widened. After that meeting, things accelerated. The bank widened its freeze. A subpoena was issued for records. There was talk of filing a civil suit alongside whatever criminal charges might be appropriate. My daughter's hubris, her belief that money could buy immunity, started to crack. She threw temper tantrums in private and tried to soothe the public by posting pictures of herself mourning on social media, a dissonant carousel of heartbreak images interspersed with luxury snapshots. The public saw the glamorous captions. The people who mattered, the ones who'd been close to my husband, started to talk, and talk can be dangerous when truth is involved. It was during those days that I met someone who would change everything. An old friend of my husband's from his volunteering days, a man named Frank, who came to my small rental one evening with a thermos of tea and a stack of letters. "He trusted you," he said simply, sitting down without pretense. He handed me letters my husband had written years ago about his fears of being taken advantage of, names scribbled in the margins, hints about people he didn't fully trust. He told me something I already suspected but had never heard him say out loud. My husband would never, ever have handed everything to one person. He told me to keep fighting, to hold my line. His presence felt like an anchor in the storm. I began to believe again, not in my daughter, but in the possibility that truth could still matter. She called after that, less frequently, more anxiously. Her pauses were longer, her words slurred by worry. She asked for meetings, for my advice, for my help with complicated problems she was suddenly too busy to manage. Each plea was like a fly attempting to land on boiled sugar. It stuck and was quickly swatted away. I played along sometimes, because there was an animal part of me that wanted to see the fear in her eyes, to savor it like a small victory. Once she asked me to come over, to talk like mother and daughter, I went with a recorder in my bag and the lawyer's instructions in my head. She thought she could ambush me with a manufactured emotion, but I was ready. I listened to her admit things she thought she could hide behind tears, about how they had fixed the will, about how it seemed like the only way to secure the future they wanted. When she said we needed it, her voice thin and rationalizing, I felt a coldness that didn't come from the words so much as from her attempt to justify the unjustifiable. You can rationalize anything when greed is the engine. I won't pretend every day was high drama. Much of it was paperwork in waiting rooms and the banal cruelty of bureaucracy. But every small victory, a subpoena served, a signature proved forged, a bank executive admitting to suspicious transfers, was a step forward. It was as if I was slowly constructing a ladder to climb back into a life they had tried to pull out from under me. In the quiet moments, though, when the house was empty and my phone sat mute,
I would think about what I had lost and feel the ache all over again. I would sketch in my head the face of my daughter as the case against her grew teeth. I would imagine the newspapers, the whispers at community events, the looks she would get when people realized she wasn't the angel she had portrayed. And I would ask myself, do I want that? Do I want her humiliation? Or do I want something purer? Justice that restores what was taken. An exposure that hurts, yes, but mostly rips away the lie. This is where things shifted from personal pain to a broader sense of responsibility. It wasn't enough for me to get my house back. I started thinking about other elders, about the hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are quietly stripped of dignity by those they trust. I thought about the times I'd heard those stories on the radio, scammers and cold calls and family members who see a parent as a bank rather than a person. My anger grew more focused. It broadened from dueling with my daughter to wanting to make sure this kind of thing couldn't be done to others so easily. That sense of mission, of wanting my pain to mean something, kept me moving forward on the coldest days. Then, one afternoon, the detective called. "We found something," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. They had traced a chain of transfers to an account that linked back to the notary and the man downtown who had smoothed things out. A call had been made from the notary's office to a number registered to my daughter on the day the will was changed. The police wanted to bring her in for questioning. My heart hammered. Relief and dread collided inside me like two trains. This was what I had fought for. This was the moment where all the evidence I had gathered became a weapon in the hands of the law. When they knocked on her door, I remember sitting at my kitchen table with my hands folded so tightly I felt the blood drain from them. I listened to the distant echo of voices carried through my phone, a neighbor updating me, a siren in the far-off distance. The reality of it hit me then. Their plan was public now. They could be arrested. They could be tried. There was no going back to the way things were. For a moment, I let myself imagine the outcome. The judge reading the charges, the gavel coming down, my daughter's face when she realized the scale of the fall. But then I pushed those images away. Justice is a complicated thing, and I knew that legal victory would not fill the void left by betrayal. It would not bring back the man who had been my husband. It would not erase the years of trust given away. What it could do, I realized, was reclaim my life and set a precedent that might protect someone else. The questions started then, the ones that linger long after courtroom dramas end. Would punishment heal? Would exposure teach her humility? Or would it harden her, send her into deeper resentment? I thought about mercy, too, briefly, as a whisper in my chest. Mercy is noble until it becomes a cover for letting evil go unchallenged. I had to find the balance between justice and the hollow drama of revenge. And in that space, I decided I would not seek to destroy her out of spite. I would seek accountability. I would demand the law take its course and the truth be known. That could be enough. Could it? I asked myself that question 100 times and never quite reached the same answer twice. They arrested her that evening. The officers were careful, professional. They led her out in handcuffs. I watched the news vans gather like vultures, the whole neighborhood leaning in to see the downfall they had only whispered about over fences. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, her husband nowhere to be seen. Seeing her there, small, diminished, brought me a rush of complicated feelings. Relief, yes. Sorrow, yes. A strange, unnameable grief at the sight of the child I had loved reduced to this. She mouthed something, maybe a plea, maybe an accusation. I didn't hear it. I turned away. That night, when the house was quiet, I sat with a cup of tea and tried to breathe. The phone buzzed with messages from people offering support, from neighbors who had always liked me, from friends who had been silent until then. It was odd how community can rally suddenly around scandal, But there were also messages of sympathy from people who'd suffered similar betrayals. They shared stories of guardianships and forged documents, and families split apart by greed. Their words made me feel less alone and also more responsible. If my experience could serve as a warning, then perhaps it had a purpose beyond the bitterness I felt. So I decided, in that dim kitchen, lit by the glow of the refrigerator light, to do something that surprised even me. I began writing. I wrote down everything, every call, every receipt, every odd conversation. I kept a diary of the process, not the salacious parts, but the procedural steps that others could follow if they found themselves in the same nightmare. I kept copies of documents and made lists of resources. It was a way of turning my pain into service. It gave me a different kind of power, the power to inform, to arm, to prepare. If I could help one person avoid what I endured, then this would be more than a personal triumph. And yet, despite the momentum, despite the arrests and the evidence, a shadow lingered. My daughter was my child. For all the cruelty, a strange tenderness remained like a scar under the skin. There were nights I woke up convinced I could still hear her small footfalls returning for comfort, for the safety I had once provided. That instinct, to protect, to forgive, to rescue, warred with the knowledge that she had betrayed me in ways that could not be ignored. It was a tension that would follow me for months, and a theme that would shape the choices I made next. In the quiet before dawn, with the house settling around me, I made a promise of a different sort. I promised myself I would not become what had hurt me. I would not trade my integrity for a momentary satisfaction of seeing her fall. I would pursue justice, yes, but I would do it as someone who had been broken and chose to be whole again. That decision would guide me forward into the investigations, the courtrooms, the media storms that were to come. It would also set the stage for a reckoning that would not just be legal, but moral. The kind that exposes the rot beneath a family's glossy surface and forces people to confront their choices. And with that promise, I prepared to step back into the ring. The fight was no longer just for a house or money. It was for dignity, for a standard of decency that says you cannot exploit the vulnerable, not even if your last name is the same as theirs. The path ahead would be long, winding, and at times brutal, but I had weathered worse storms. The difference was that now I knew how to aim. The anger that had once felt like a raw wound had become a sharpened instrument of purpose. I would use it to cut through the lies. So I waited for the next move, eyes open, pen ready, and heart steeled. What happens next? How far will I go? Would you, in my position, choose the path of quiet vengeance or the one of public reckoning? I thought of that question often, as if asking it aloud might conjure the right answer. The truth was, I didn't yet know. But I knew this. I wouldn't be passive anymore. I had been punched, knocked down, shoved out into the cold. Now I would stand, and when I did, I would make sure no one could blame the cold for the fall. The investigation continued to unfurl in ways that kept me both hopeful and afraid. There were late-night calls from the detective, careful updates that meant progress, a call traced, a suspect interviewed, a ledger found. I watched as the legal machinery, so slow at the start, began finally to move. And when the father of my grandchildren, the man who had once shared my life and my debts, was revealed to have left a paper trail of his own that proved his intent to protect me, the puzzle pieces started to click into a shape that made sense. His handwriting samples matched older documents, friends came forward with recollections, a banker admitted to being pressured by unfamiliar men in dark suits to smooth things over. The more I learned, the clearer the painting of betrayal became. When the police and bank started freezing accounts, I thought that would be the end of it. I thought my daughter and her husband would panic, maybe apologize, maybe even beg me to forgive them. But instead, they doubled down. They acted like predators who'd been cornered, thrashing and snarling, desperate to keep control. Suddenly, I was getting calls at all hours. Some nights she was sobbing, telling me she was sorry, so sorry, and other nights she was screaming, accusing me of ruining her life. She swung between guilt and rage so fast it made my head spin. But every time I reminded myself, this isn't the voice of a daughter. This is the voice of someone who thinks she's about to lose $33 million. And that's exactly what was at stake. $33 million. Do you have any idea how dangerous people can become when that much money is on the line? The investigators worked day and night, piecing together the fraud. They discovered forged documents, suspicious transfers, secret accounts. It wasn't just sloppy, it was criminal. When the police showed up at her house with a warrant, I heard later from a neighbor that she nearly fainted. They hauled out boxes of papers, laptops, even her husband's phone. The whole street watched, whispers flying. For the first time, I felt the weight on my chest start to lift. Justice was moving. But you know what happens when justice gets close? The guilty start clawing for escape. And that's when things got even darker. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice introduced herself as the mother of my daughter's husband. Calm, polished, cold. She said, "We can make this all go away. My son and your daughter will give you $10 million if you agree to drop the charges. No court, no scandal. Think about it, dear. $10 million for your trouble." I sat there, clutching the phone, stunned at her audacity. As if my dignity, my husband's legacy, could be bought like a handbag. I asked her, "And what if I say no?" Her tone shifted, sharp as a blade. "Then we might start looking into your late husband's business dealings. Are you sure you want all his secrets exposed?" My blood ran cold. What did she mean? My husband had been many things, but corrupt? No, not him. Or at least that's what I thought. That call planted a seed of dread that kept me up for nights. What if they were right? What if my husband had a past I never knew? And the next week, my lawyer sat me down. His face was pale, his fingers steepled. He said, "There's something you need to see." He pulled out a folder, thick with documents. As I flipped through them, my stomach twisted. Offshore accounts, large unexplained transfers, names of companies I'd never heard of, my husband's signature on deals that looked suspicious. I shook my head, refusing to believe. "This isn't him," I whispered. But the lawyer's eyes told me otherwise. That night, I cried harder than I had since his funeral. Had my husband been a criminal? Had my whole marriage been a lie? And then, just when I thought I couldn't sink deeper, the FBI knocked on my door. 2 agents, serious faces, badges glinting. They asked if they could come in. My heart pounded as they sat at my little kitchen table. One of them leaned forward and said, "Ma'am, your husband wasn't what he seemed, but he wasn't a criminal either. He was working with us. He was an informant." My mind reeled. Informant? They explained that my husband had been gathering evidence on organized crime families for years. Those strange accounts, those transfers, they were part of a sting operation. He hadn't told me because it was too dangerous. My eyes filled with tears. Relief, pride, and sorrow tangled together. He hadn't betrayed me. He had been protecting me, even from the truth. The agent's voice softened. "You need to understand. This means your daughter and her husband are in far deeper trouble than you realized. They've tampered not just with family assets, but with federal evidence." My breath caught. This was bigger than I ever imagined.
Over the next few weeks, the FBI kept me close. They showed me how my daughter and her husband had been trying to use the inheritance to launder money, to gain leverage, to blackmail me into silence. Every new detail made me sick. But then the agent said something that lit a fire inside me. They said, "If you're willing, we can use you to help bring them down. You're the only person they'll still talk to. You can be our eyes and ears." My pulse thundered in my ears. Me? Wear a wire? Set up my own daughter? Could I really do that? I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with guilt and fury.
But then I remembered her words. Find somewhere else to die. I remembered being pushed out of my own home, and I thought of my husband risking his life for justice. How could I do less? So I said yes. I let them tape a tiny recorder to my chest. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, setting up a meeting. When she picked up, her voice was sweet. Fake sweet. Like honey hiding poison. "Mom, can we talk? Just us. No lawyers, no police." I forced my voice to stay calm. "All right, let's talk." She didn't know she was walking into her own trap. The day of the meeting, I arrived early. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I kept touching the recorder under my blouse, reminding myself it was there. When she walked in with her husband, I almost didn't recognize her. Her face was thinner, her eyes darting, her smile strained. She leaned close, whispering urgently, "Mom, listen, we can fix this. If you just withdraw your complaint, we'll cut you in. You'll get millions. You'll be comfortable. Isn't that what Dad would have wanted?" Her husband's eyes, cold and calculating, flicked over me like I was prey. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to flinch. I said, "And what if I don't?" Her smile vanished. She hissed, "Then you'll regret it. We know things about Dad, things that could ruin his name. Don't push us, Mom." My blood boiled, but I kept my voice steady. "Is that a threat?" Her husband smirked. "It's a promise." And the recorder caught it all. When I left that cafe, the FBI agents were waiting. They had everything they needed. Within days, there were arrests. My daughter, my flesh and blood, was handcuffed in front of neighbors, her face pale and terrified. Her husband, too, snarling as they shoved him into the back of a car. Conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, attempted blackmail. The charges stacked higher and higher. I watched the news coverage, my hands shaking, my chest heavy with the mix of triumph and the sorrow. This wasn't how I ever wanted justice to look. But she had chosen this path, not me. She had walked herself into destruction, and all I had done was stop pretending I was too weak to fight back. But even as she sat in a cell, the storm wasn't over. Her husband's criminal ties ran deep. His family had money, connections, power, and they weren't going to let him rot without a fight. I started getting letters, cryptic and menacing. "Drop the charges or you'll regret it. Think of your husband's legacy." My hands shook as I read them, but instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't alone anymore. The FBI had my back. The law was on my side. And I had something stronger than all of them. Truth. Still, the weight of it pressed on me. Late at night, staring into the dark, I wondered, had I gone too far? Was there still a chance to save her? To pull her back from the edge? Or was I fooling myself holding on to the idea of a daughter who no longer existed? What do you think? Would you have given her one last chance? Or would you have let the law take its course, no matter how much it hurt? The night after her arrest, I sat in silence, staring at the news broadcast on my little television. The anchor's voice was calm, almost detached, as he described my daughter, my own child, as a suspect in a federal fraud case. Arrested alongside her husband for conspiracy, fraud, elder financial abuse, and attempted blackmail. The words didn't feel real. They echoed in my ears as though they belonged to someone else's family. And yet it was mine, my family, my blood. I thought about the day I held her for the first time, how tiny her fingers were, how her little mouth searched for milk, how her father cried when he saw her. How do you reconcile that child with the woman now sitting in a cell, facing the possibility of decades behind bars? Tell me, if it were your child, would you feel relief or devastation? Or some twisted mix of both, like I did? But if I thought her arrest would be the end of it, I was naive. Because when people with money and connections feel the walls closing in, they don't crumble. They fight dirtier. Within days, the son-in-law's family moved into action, high-powered lawyers, PR specialists, shadowy figures who operated in the spaces between legality and crime. And then came the threats. Anonymous letters slipped under my door, late-night calls with voices whispering, "Drop it or you'll regret it." Once I came home to find my mailbox torn open, papers scattered, as if to remind me they could reach me anytime. The old me would have broken under that kind of pressure. But now I felt something else. A steel I didn't know I had. Maybe it was my husband's strength living in me. Maybe it was just anger finally finding its spine. But I didn't break. I called the FBI every time. I kept every letter, every scrap of evidence, and I told myself, they can't scare me back into silence. Not anymore. The FBI agents, especially one named Agent Carter, became my lifeline. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a surprisingly gentle voice. He would sit across from me at my kitchen table, sipping the bitter coffee I made, and walk me through every step. "They're going to push hard," he warned. "They'll try to manipulate you, intimidate you, maybe even lure you with money. But we've got their number, and with your help, we'll bury them." He always paused after that, looking carefully at me. "And are you sure you're strong enough to see this through?" I'd grip the edge of the table, my knuckles white, and nod. "I've been through worse," I whispered. "They've already taken everything from me. What more can they do?" But deep inside, I knew the answer. They could take my peace. They could take my sanity. And if I wasn't careful, they could even take my life. That's how high the stakes felt. Court hearings started, pretrial motions, lawyers spinning stories. My daughter, in her expensive suits, sat at the defense table looking like a trapped animal. Sometimes she glared at me with pure hatred. Sometimes she tried to soften her eyes, like she was silently begging me to stop. I couldn't look at her for long. The sight was a knife twist every time. The prosecutors laid out the evidence, and it was damning. Forged wills, secret accounts, recordings of threats, the works. Her husband, smug as ever, sat beside her, whispering in her ear, directing her like a puppet master. I felt bile rise in my throat every time I saw his hand brush hers, as if to remind her that she was his co-conspirator. She had chosen him over me, chosen greed over love, and now she was reaping the harvest of those choices. Still, the legal system moves slowly, grinding through paperwork, arguments, delays, and in the spaces between, I lived in a strange limbo. On one hand, I felt vindicated. The world was finally seeing the truth. On the other, I was haunted by memories. I'd walk by a park and remember taking her there as a child, pushing her on the swing, listening to her laugh. I'd smell cookies in a bakery and remember teaching her how to bake with her tiny hands covered in flour. How do you carry that kind of grief while watching your child unravel? Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering, had I failed her, or had she simply chosen darkness on her own? What do you think? Are some people born selfish, or are they shaped that way by the lives we give them? The in-laws weren't done with me, though. They tried everything. Another phone call, this time more venomous than before. The husband's mother again, her voice dripping poison. "Do you really think you're going to win? You're old, tired. You don't have the years left to fight this battle. Take the money and disappear. No one will blame you." I clenched the phone, my voice low and steady. "You don't scare me. And you don't buy me. Not now, not ever." She laughed, cold and sharp. "We'll see." And then she hung up. My hands shook after that call, but in a strange way, it steeled me even further. Every threat they threw only proved one thing. They were desperate. And desperation is weakness. Meanwhile, the FBI uncovered even more. My daughter's husband wasn't just greedy, he was criminal to the bone. Old records surfaced. Fraud, tax evasion, even whispers of money laundering for dangerous people. It turned out he'd been under investigation long before he ever married my daughter, and now, by joining forces with him, she had chained herself to a sinking ship. The prosecutor smiled when they told me this. He thought he was clever. He's not. He left a trail a mile wide. I couldn't help but think back to the day she brought him home for the first time. I had reservations then, a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain, but she had been so in love, so defiant,
swearing he was her future. I'd tried to support her. I'd tried to believe in her choice, and this was the result. A man who dragged her straight into ruin. The FBI wanted more from me. They weren't satisfied with just the recordings we already had. They asked me to meet with her again, to push harder, to let her reveal more of their schemes. My stomach twisted at the thought. How many times could I sit across from my own daughter, pretending to play along, knowing I was helping to destroy her life? But then I reminded myself, she wasn't the daughter I once knew. She had become something else, something dangerous. So I agreed. Once again, I wore the wire. Once again, I smiled through clenched teeth as she tried to manipulate me. This time, she offered me more money, painted pictures of me living in luxury, told me I could have a fresh start if I just dropped everything. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. And if I don't? Her eyes hardened. Then you'll regret it. You'll end up with nothing, alone, forgotten. And just like that, she sealed her own fate again. Every meeting, every word tightened the noose. The FBI collected evidence like pearls on a string, each one shining with her guilt. Until finally, Agent Carter told me, "We're ready. One more move, and they're done." My heart raced as I nodded. It was happening. The endgame was near. But at the same time, a part of me trembled, because once it was over, there would be no going back, no second chances, no possibility of reconciliation. My daughter's life as she knew it would be finished, and I would be the one who lit the match. Can you imagine carrying that kind of weight? Could you do it if it meant justice for yourself, but destruction for your own child? The storm gathered, dark and heavy. I could feel it pressing down, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. Friends tried to comfort me, told me I was brave, told me I was strong. But in the quiet of night, when the house was silent, I would clutch my husband's old sweater and whisper, "Am I doing the right thing? Or am I becoming as cold as she is?" The silence gave no answer, but the truth was clear. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. The morning of the final sting, the air felt heavier, like even the sky knew what was about to happen. Agent Carter had called me the night before, his voice low but steady. "Tomorrow's the day," he said. "We'll need you to be ready." I barely slept. My mind spun in endless circles. What if something went wrong? What if they found out I was wired? What if at the very last second, my daughter realized the trap and turned it on me? The thought made my stomach clench so hard I thought I'd be sick. And yet, beneath all that fear, a strange calm pulsed. It was almost like destiny had been building to this moment. All the lies, all the betrayals, all the pain. Finally, it was going to break. I met her at the same cafe we had used before, the one that had become the stage for our deadly little play. She walked in, heels clicking against the floor, face painted in confidence. But I saw it, the tiny cracks, the way her hands twitched, the faint shadows under her eyes. Prison had touched her, even if only briefly, and it had left its mark. She slid into the seat across from me, her perfume strong, her smile sharp as a knife. "Mom," she said, as if the word wasn't poisoned, "you've been so stubborn, but I think I finally have something that'll change your mind." I kept my hand steady on my lap, the wire pressing against my skin, every word being captured, every syllable sealing her fate. She leaned forward, voice dropping. "We can make this go away. Dad's estate, your reputation, even this FBI nonsense. It can all vanish if you play along. There are people who owe us favors, people who can fix things, but I need your cooperation." I tilted my head, as though curious.
And if I don't? Her eyes hardened, the mask slipping just for a second. Then you'll regret it. You'll end up with nothing, alone, forgotten. And in that moment, I felt something inside me snap. All the hurt, all the sleepless nights, all the threats, it boiled into a fire I couldn't hold back. My voice came out steady, sharper than I intended. You already destroyed me. You destroyed this family. And if you think I'll ever help you after what you've done, you're a fool. Her lips parted in shock, but before she could answer, the cafe doors swung open. Agents swarmed in, their voices loud, commanding, "Federal agents, nobody move!" My daughter's eyes widened. Her husband, who was sitting a few tables away, watching, leaped to his feet, but he didn't get far. They were on him in seconds, pulling his arms behind his back, snapping the cuffs tight. The look on his face wasn't fear. It was fury, pure and hot, like a cornered animal. But my daughter, her face told the whole story. She wasn't angry. She was broken. Her eyes flicked to me, wide, desperate, as they pulled her to her feet and cuffed her wrists. And in that look, I saw the child she used to be, just for an instant. Then it was gone.
The cafe erupted in chaos. People gasping, some filming on their phones, whispers of "what's happening" filling the air. But all I heard was the clink of metal as the cuffs locked around her wrists. All I saw was the daughter I once cradled being led out the door like a common criminal. My knees went weak, and I had to grip the table to stay upright. Agent Carter touched my shoulder gently as he passed. "It's over," he said. "You did it." But I didn't feel victory, not yet. Just an emptiness so vast it scared me. The trial that followed was a storm of its own. The prosecutors laid everything bare. Every forged signature, every recorded threat, every dollar siphoned. Witnesses came forward. Bank records told stories my daughter couldn't escape. The jury watched, stone-faced, as the evidence piled higher and higher. Her husband's past came out too, a laundry list of crimes stretching back years. The picture was undeniable. Predators cloaked in respectability, feeding off the weak. And at the center of it, my daughter, who had once held my hand on her first day of school, now reduced to a case number in a federal courtroom. She tried to fight. Her lawyers spun tales of misunderstanding, of manipulation by her husband, of a mother with a vendetta twisting the truth. They painted me as bitter, vengeful, unstable. Sitting there, listening to strangers dissect my life, my grief, my choices, it felt like being stripped bare. But the prosecutors were relentless, and the recordings, my recordings, cut through every lie. Hearing her voice, dripping with greed and venom, played aloud for the jury was surreal. It wasn't just me anymore. Everyone could hear it. Everyone could see what she had become. The verdict came after days of deliberation. Guilty, on all major counts. My daughter's husband barely flinched, as though he'd expected it. But she broke. The moment the word was spoken, her shoulders collapsed, her face crumpled, and for the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the performative kind she used to manipulate, but raw, naked terror. The judge read the sentences. Her husband, 25 years. My daughter, 15. My ears rang. 15 years of my daughter's life gone. 15 years I'd never get back with her. 15 years of emptiness where a family bond used to be. People whispered congratulations, patted my back, told me I'd been brave, but all I could think was, I lost her. I lost her long before this, but now it was final. The door had slammed shut. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day my husband would have loved. The sky was bright, the air crisp, children laughing somewhere in the distance. And yet, I felt hollow. Revenge had been served. Justice had been carried out. But there was no joy in it. Just silence. Just the weight of everything that had been lost. People always think revenge will heal you, that it will stitch the wounds closed. But it doesn't. It just leaves scars where the bleeding used to be. In the weeks that followed, I tried to rebuild. I poured my energy into the community, into helping other seniors protect themselves from fraud, into volunteering. I told my story not to shame my daughter, but to warn others how betrayal can come from the places you least expect. Some listened, some looked at me with pity, some with admiration. But inside, I still wrestled with the question, had I done the right thing? I know what most people would say. Yes, of course. She tried to rob you, destroy you. You had no choice. But at night, when the world quieted, I still heard her voice calling me Mom, and I wondered if, somewhere deep down, she regretted it too. I visited her once, months after the sentencing. She looked different. Thinner, paler, her eyes dulled. She didn't smile when she saw me. She just stared, silent, until finally she whispered, "Why couldn't you just let it go?" My heart shattered all over again. I whispered back, "Because it was wrong. Because you left me no choice." She turned her head away, and that was the last word she spoke to me that day. I left the prison with tears blinding my eyes, knowing I might never hear her call me Mom with love again. So, here I am, years later, telling you this story. Not because I want sympathy, not because I want praise, but because I want you to understand something. Betrayal doesn't come clean. It doesn't end neatly with a bow. It stains everything. It changes you forever. I avenged myself. I avenged my husband. But I also lost my daughter in the process. That's the price of justice sometimes. And if you're ever faced with the same choice between letting evil thrive or burning down the last bridge to someone you love, ask yourself this: what would you choose? Because I can tell you, from the deepest place in my soul, whichever path you take, you'll never walk away whole.